Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. For years and years, Democrats just sat back and allowed paid GOP shills to get in front of the cameras and yell at school boards and other organizations, all the while the local Fox TV affiliate was in attendance as if it had been set up. These racist blowhards were there because wealthy right-wing racists like the ones who paid shills like Chris Rufo to get on TV paid them to be there too. It was all planned political theater, and Democrats were only too willing to let the show go on because black people were pushing our demands. And the Democrats wanted to support any kind of political pushback against us because our demands were threatening the white power that they depend on as well. But of course, the Democrats didn't want their grimy little fingerprints on it, so instead, as I keep telling you, they allowed the Republicans to do their dirty work for them. Both of the major parties are not really in competition against each other. They're in competition against black empowerment, the only real threat to the system that they depend on. And that being the case, go ahead and allow the Republicans to do their dirty work. They sat back and did nothing, just allowing Republicans to pass laws such as the ones that legalize hitting black protesters with one's cars and other blatant illegalities. The Democrats didn't so much as say boo about it, much less lead any sort of protests. But when Trump's Supreme Court overturned abortion as a fundamental right, Democrats suddenly found their voice, and while they didn't necessarily fund or organize any of the state ballot referendums that followed, Democrats in the left corner of the white media, however, did praise and support those who did. Well, now we're seeing that there's what can be only called the left equivalent of what the white right had done. Anywhere that a Republican congressman or senator, or in some cases even Democratic members of Congress, are coming to a town hall, the white media publicizes it, and at a number of these events, the Congress people in question are met by an angry crowd. Many of the people who are in attendance are Democrats or otherwise white leftist operatives, and they're booing these guys, yelling at them, facing them with hostility. Except they're not talking about punishing the police. They're not talking about dismantling the racist legislation the Democrats allowed Republicans to get away with at the state level. They're certainly not talking about reparations either. Instead, it's the usual pet projects for the white left. In this case, they're yelling and screaming about federal workers being laid off. Again, Democrats, as usual, are trying to find a way to cobble together some new political coalition, one that won't rely on black voters, or rather, won't be vulnerable to the demands of black voters. That's what this operation is really about. And you see that they keep trying the same tactic. No matter what happens to them politically, no matter how badly they lose during some general or off-year election, they still continue with their mission that they're going to find a way to insulate themselves from the wrath of black voters, because the last thing they're going to do is anything that black people demand. Just like the white left with their school board screaming matches, the point of these current demonstrations in front of these Congress people at these town halls is to focus the attention and the drive of the voters for future elections. That's the reason why they're starting so early. The math on these kind of things is pretty straightforward. If you want to prepare for an election, you got to begin your voter outreach and campaigning at least 2 years in advance to get your name out there and organize your supporters. If you wait until the year of the election, that's simply too late. There's an old saying that politics is the continuation of warfare by alternative means, and that's why political campaigns are just like military ones. And when it comes to war, it's all in the planning. But understand, having all of those crisis actors showing up at those school boards, only in red districts, by the way, where they knew that they could go ahead and say, we want you to ban anything about slavery, and then of course you would have the GOP shills on those school boards who would comply with it so they could claim, see, it's sweeping the nation. No, it's not. All it is the latest bit of racial hysteria that's filtering its way through the same old blood-red capitals and the same old blood-red districts, but the Democrats were allowing it to happen because they wanted it to. This was about trying to focus white voter support in those areas to the white right where those antics took place. Democrats are now trying to do their own variation on the exact same thing. Now, since Latinos broke for Trump and he's deporting a large number of immigrants, Democrats aren't beating that particular drum anymore. That's not going to be what's happening at these meetings with these Congress members. Nobody's going to be shrieking at them, we need to shut down ICE, no matter what AOC may say. But there's been a lot of attention that's been given to these basically protests that are happening at these town halls, all the yelling and such. Now, I've got no problem with people organizing to put their issues on the ballot and to put pressure on politicians, but the problem I've got is that we are not the ones doing it. All these public disruptions that we've seen have simply been established power playing the same old games, and it's meant to uphold the same old order. Nothing's going to change unless and until we are the ones making these political parasites feel the heat. In the past, we've seen some black folks who have stepped up to politicians and media figures alike. This has to become the norm for us. Find out where these politicians are going to be at, or better yet, tell them you need to come to town and answer to us. Bring your cameras with you, and make sure the camera is held sideways, by the way, and then press your demands. That's what people actually need to be seeing. That's the reason why you had all that hell being raised in Chicago about illegal aliens being put up, and you got the state floating money to them. It was black people who were sounding the alarm on that. It was black people who were making sure that there was pressure being applied. The entire reason the black media was able to make any headway was because we dared to cross that line, to say what had been on the tip of everybody's tongue. We showed people that they weren't alone, that what they had been thinking to themselves or only saying amongst a small number of their friends and family was in fact what the majority thought. But the rubber really met the road when online advocacy finally translated into offline action. Please do not underestimate the power of you stepping forward. When you hear me talking about the moral legitimacy that we represent, I'm talking about you. Now, are people going to try to shout you down when you stand up? Of course they do. They always have tried to shout us down. That's the norm. And it's because while they're playing their political power games, they all know that the only thing they really fear is an upending of the racial hierarchy that they all depend on. Black people giving empty statements about how they love the Democrats, or giving pathetic speeches about how the GOP is our only alternative. That comforts the dominant society because it means that we're still playing along with the fraud. We're still trying to make a choice, quote unquote, from the two false options that they give us. But when black people make ourselves the center of the political universe, that is a threat, full stop. And it is way past time that black people had our voices heard. When it comes to holding these politicians' feet to the fire, black people are the main ones who are supposed to be front and center for that, because our demands and our interests and issues are far more pressing and important than anyone else's. It's time for black people to be the ones to stand on business, literally. You can't wait for someone else to do it. We're all past that now. In the beginning, people were all meek and self-conscious about talking about reparations because the white media had spent the better part of 50 years brainwashing black folks and conditioning black people that, talking about reparations, that's such a weirdo kook issue. You're talking about reparations for slavery. Oh, that's just some lunacy. And then the black media started saying it online, the black grassroots carried that message offline, and before you knew it, people weren't laughing anymore. Reparations had been relegated to being an awkward fringe issue, but not anymore. And that was because the black boomers never made it an issue. They refused to mention it. They refused to confront Democrat politicians with it and tell them you can't get our vote unless you pledge our tangibles. They refused to push for it and definitely refused to say that they would withhold their vote unless they got it. But now you got Generation X and the millennials and increasingly Gen Z who are getting on code, and the conversation has changed. You see, a subject is only awkward or relegated to the fringe as long as you allow it to be. Boomers allowed black to no longer be a regular part of the political discourse, and so it was completely and thoroughly sidelined until it was made into an issue that you just couldn't talk about. It was a forbidden subject. Black? Well, we're past all that. That's controversial. Black is divisive. They allowed black to be replaced by minority and people of color and inner city, and whatever other weasel words some white DNC operative came up with to falsely claim that they had been talking about us, all the while talking about everyone except us. Nothing happens in a vacuum under white supremacy, so when you see these town halls where you got these people who are yelling and shouting at Congressman XYZ about federal job closures and such, understand, as far as they're concerned, this is the kind of momentum they want because it carries the issue away from what we're demanding. If they were really serious about trying to find a way to change the political dynamic, if they were really serious about overturning Republican control of Congress and the White House, then they would be talking to the black vote. That would be the easiest way to do it, the straight line to it. But they finally realized that black people are starting to call out a lot of these Democrat politicians and saying, you know what, it's time for you to get these people out of here and you're going to put people in there that we approve of. These efforts are at the beginning stages right now. The kind of resources and community action necessary to start thoroughly upending these political races has not crystallized yet. And as far as the Democrats are concerned, they're trying to make sure that it never does. It's our job to make sure that their efforts to derail us and demoralize us fail. A good start would be to put pressure on the congressional black talkers. Most of us live in districts where one of these scumbags happens to be our so-called representative. Well, it's time to confront them directly, publicly, with the truth of our lineage. Reparations must be the political litmus test, Nothing else matters more than that. It must be the very reason that you point the finger at them and demand that they resign or otherwise leave office because they have not stood up for our tangibles. Let them know. We've been talking about this for decades. They haven't been talking about it at all. And that means that they cannot be our representative. We have to put them on the spot, harshly and frequently. We know that these guys are all beholden to foreign countries. They make it a point to think to themselves that they're so slick. We have to call an end to their little party. Any of that mealy-mouthed minorities talk is going to get them laughed out of the room and get them run out of office. It's time to reestablish the old normal, which is you gotta know where it's at and what it's gotta be. You have all of these immigrant groups who put their issues and interests front and center, and they do not talk about us at all. In fact, if they do mention us, it's to say that apparently black people are getting too much when we haven't gotten anything at all. And your congressional black talkers, they'll be going right along with that. And by the way, when you step forward and finally start putting some heat on these bootlicks, don't expect the white media, certainly not the left corner of the white media, to be giving massive coverage to that, repeating it and replaying it and telling everybody how great this is. In fact, when you start putting heat on these politicians, they're going to say that it's a problem. They're going to say that it's controversial. It's divisive. There's an issue with it. Oh, this is the far left. The Democrats need to do something about these guys. This is the far left. No, we are as center as it gets because we stand for justice. And justice is always balance. And don't worry about the white media giving any attention to our efforts. Keep in mind, whenever these guys do mention us, they only do it to attack us, so it's better that they not. Just understand that as more black people start to step forward and we take the lead on confronting these politicians, expect the same white media that's sitting here lauding white people for speaking up about federal workers being laid off, expect them to start attacking us. And that's how you know that we've hit the spot, that we got the scumbags scared. We need to speak up for ourselves alone and put everyone else on notice that unless we're the ones doing the yelling, it's all just empty noise. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Frederick Dawkins, Reasonable Dude, Josh Heath, Andre Evans, and D. Allen. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.